Okay, let's open in a word of prayer here. Give me 1 second here while I switch to my... Okay, let's open the word of prayer. Lord, thanks for this day. We pray that you bless our time together today, that we'll try to make sense of a very chaotic world. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this Tectonic Earthquake Waiting for the Volcano. I took that, there was a great interview Dan Senor did of a guy named Yotanan Adiri, who is I think he lives in Israel. He's a Syria expert. He's half Iraqi, half Iranian, something like that. The typical Middle Eastern, comes from a whole bunch of different things. And so he said that what's going on, what we're seeing in the Middle East right now, as you may have noticed if you've been paying attention at all this week, a lot of things happen. I'll talk about that. I'm going to do a little bit about America first. I'm going to read a passage, though, that I think will be coming into play. So in his interview, Yotanan with Dan Senor called me back, said, this is tectonic, it's an earthquake, and we're just waiting for the volcano. What we saw this week was just absolutely stunning on a number of levels. And I think there were a lot of things that I would call tectonic, earthquake, and waiting for the volcano, including here in the United States. So these are my chess pieces. You can see I've got the Syrian rook is now being shattered. I have an update on that one. I'll show you a little bit later. Turkey's involved in this. Everything's been kind of what I would call seismic in the way, and this is my wheel of prophecy. I keep threatening that someday I'm just going to get up and give it a whirl. But I watch and read a lot of different things, a lot of different people, and I will say this: you can send me things. I don't always have time to read them in depth, but I can say this without any question. People are studying, people are thinking through it, and nobody agrees with anybody else. I mean, it's... And so that's why I've tried to do these things like on AI and technology roundtables. We're going to try to expand that to some other topics. Because I think we just need to kind of sit down and talk and reason with each other about these things. That's sort of my goal, not to get into heated arguments and stomp off and pick up your chess pieces and roll away. So there's some people say the horses are already riding, the seals have already opened. And I'm not sure. Somebody sent me a thing that I thought was and I don't remember now if he was criticizing me or helping me out or what, but he made a very good point in his message to me. And he said, sometimes you're out on the highway at night and you see a car coming, you see the headlights. But after the car goes by, you see the taillights, but you're still seeing the same car, but you're just seeing it from a different perspective. I think sometimes that's a good idea to keep in mind when we look at these things in Bible prophecy. So I mentioned last week, I talked a little bit about Daniel chapter 7. I'm going to read for you, and that's with the four beasts. And somebody's done these great job on these graphics that they let you use for free if you don't make money off of it. And so these would be the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7. But today, if you remember my wheel of prophecy, I have the ram and the goat in the center of my little wheel. So today I'm going to read for you Daniel chapter 8. Did I read this last week? Did I read 8 last week? No, you don't remember? I don't even remember. It's always funny because some people say, you really need to talk about this week. And I know immediately they haven't watched because I did talk about it. I think. Sometimes I have to go check, so I don't expect you to remember everything. I think I read Daniel 7 last week. So let's, vision of a ram and goat. And I'm only going to read down through about verse 17. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, let me move over here to my ram and goat slide. A vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. That's sort of in play now, and with some of these things going on with Iran. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. As I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of the 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew up fast, and it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another one said to him that a certain one who was speaking, and said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when I came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. And that's an interesting phrase there, the time of the end. Now, some will interpret this as a reference to Alexander the Great coming from the west across, taking down the Medo-Persian Empire. And in some respects, that's true. But then the question is, why is the phrase in there for the time of the end? And what happens sometimes in Bible prophecy is we have a tendency to default towards the prophecy's fulfilled, it's finished, it's over, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. But maybe this one's not done. Maybe it's one of these ones that repeats as a pattern. And I think really what we're seeing now is we may be seeing the beginning of this ram and goat prophecy between Turkey and Iran. Now, I'm not saying that I'm dogmatic on this or that I have it all figured out, but the phrase, the time of the end, remember when we look at the book of Daniel in chapter 12, also in Daniel 11, it talks about the fact, in Daniel 12 specifically, it says, Daniel, seal up the book to what? The time of the end. And at the time of the end, then men will understand, they'll instruct many, but the wicked will never understand. So the question is the time of the end in Daniel chapter 12 similar to the time of the end in Daniel chapter 8? And I can already see my inbox will be filling up with loving emails from everybody that I have it all wrong, that Daniel 8 is different from Daniel 12. But my concern, what I see in a lot of people in the community, there's a tendency to jump to it was already fulfilled in the past, or it's already fulfilled now. And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I listen to guys talk about, the abomination of desolation has already taken place, and I'm just telling you, it makes absolutely no sense to me. And there's a guy out there now saying the October 7th invasion of Israel, because it was called Al-Aqsa Flood. You may have seen him. And he seems like a really nice guy. And by the way, I've listened to a couple of his talks, and a lot of stuff I would agree with him on. But I just think saying that invasion of Israel, because they call it Al-Aqsa Flood, is the abomination of desolation. I just don't think that you can make that leap. And so there's this tendency to, and I don't even want to get into the motives of why people do it. But there's a tendency of people to say, that's been fulfilled. Now, maybe not. Maybe it's in the process, maybe it's stage setting. So I just think we need to be a little careful. Okay, so let's look at this. So this is the United States. I'm never going to pardon my son until, it's... And I think he probably said that because he knew he always could, and he knew maybe his Justice Department wasn't going to go after him on allegations about taking money from China or that sort of thing, or acting as the bag man for the Biden family in terms of getting the money and transferring it to the big guy that he talks about in his emails. This has been a stunning thing to me. Everybody knew that was Hunter Biden's laptop. And 50-some former intelligence FBI people signed a letter saying, it's Russian misinformation. Now, it's impossible to make up that much misinformation if you understand how there's meta tags and all this data that comes along with your emails, timestamps, when it was created. There's a whole host of electronic information with every electronic document that you do. You may not know that, but if you're an attorney and you do discovery of electronic information, you know that there's a lot of information. You can even tell which computer created it and where. And so to make all of that up in a laptop with thousands and thousands and thousands of emails is just absolutely preposterous. And these people who did it, that were in the intelligence community, they should have their security clearances revoked at a minimum. And I think they will be in about 45 days, assuming that President Trump takes office in about 45 days. I say that listen, this week, in 3 days, I'll show you the maps. We saw the country of Assyria fall to a group of rebels. Now, how did that happen? 3 days, that big country fell. I mean, it's several hundred miles, I think, from Damascus up to Aleppo and up to the northern border. I'll show you the maps. So when you see something like that happen, it's very difficult to say, well, in 45 days, Trump will be sworn in as president, because who knows? So here's Biden, and he made this pardon of his son. And I saw a person on, I don't know, it's my Facebook feed or wherever, said, well, we Christians, we should understand the concept of a pardon because the Lord has forgiven us. Now listen, you're probably going to be unfriended or whatever. That's silly. Because the pardon for us, there's faith and repentance and all that stuff that's associated with it. And you have not seen any of that from Hunter Biden. And Joe Biden is not God. Yeah, he's put in a place of authority. And so he pardoned his son, and people are melting down on the left and right. They're saying, no, this shouldn't be done. And but the scope of the pardon is what's incredible. For those offenses against the United States which he has committed, or may have committed, or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014, which is around the time he got involved in Ukraine on the board there, through December 1st, 2024, including but not limited to all offenses charged or prosecuted, including any that may have resulted in convictions. And he names a couple cases there, but it's a blanket pardon. Everything that he did that could have been a federal crime has been pardoned. Now the question is, what do you do about it? Under the Constitution, the pardon power of the president is pretty absolute. There has been for some time in Washington, and I know this from personal experience, I would call it a cottage industry from lawyers to help you obtain pardons for people convicted of federal crimes. And the retainer fee can be well into six figures with no guarantees. I mean, it's a lot of money. And some people, they use their connections to the White House on both sides of the aisle to try to get a pardon for their clients. And that's fine. You know, the president's allowed to do the pardons. This one, the only one that may have been this broad was the pardon that Gerald Ford gave to Richard Nixon. There's never been a pardon of a family member, a close family member like this. So it's unprecedented. It's a blanket pardon. Even the New York Times came out in its editorial this morning, the dangerous precedent of Biden's pardon. Why? Why is it dangerous? Well, because here comes that crazy guy, Donald Trump, and he's going to do that to other people. And so how does everybody handle it? Now, I think part of what's going is Kash Patel, who's a conservative bomb thrower, lawyer, smart guy, and he said, we're going to investigate everybody. And the left is melting down about this because how dare they use the judicial system against their political opponents? I mean, that's terrible. So this week, and let's hope this is the last video clip I have to play of him, trigger alert, and play 2 minutes of Barack Obama speaking in Chicago at the Obama Foundation about how we deal with this problem. I want you to watch this. I want you to listen carefully to what he's talking about. And I want you to also see that to me, well, I'll talk about it afterwards. I'll let you decide how he's doing.
At this point, you may be thinking, this all sounds pretty good, except pluralism depends on everyone following a certain set of rules. That's what you said, Obama. What happens when the other side has repeatedly and abundantly made clear they are not interested in playing by the rules? It's a problem. And when that happens, we fight for what we believe in. There are going to be times, potentially, when one side tries to stack the deck and lock in a permanent grip on power, either by actively suppressing votes or politicizing the armed forces or using the judiciary, the criminal justice system to go after opponents. And in those circumstances, pluralism does not call for us to just stand back and say, well, I'm not sure. That's okay. In those
Okay, that's enough. But listen, Did that just sound a lot hypocritical to you? And it looked like it was so bad that he even had trouble getting the words out there for a time. They will always accuse you of doing what they are going to do or have done. That's sort of a rule of thumb. By the way, I'm not saying that people on the right or conservatives or anything, they're perfect or anything like that, okay? But I'm just saying is the justice system was weaponized against people over the last 16 years. We went through this whole fake Russia thing. It was proven, and they still bring it up like it's true. It's unbelievable. One of the manifestations of that, I'm going to play just a couple short clips. This week, there was the transgender case that reached the Supreme Court of the United States. This is very interesting. And I'm glad that we had a President Trump that appointed people and that there's a majority there that think that can stand up against this absolute, complete nonsense. So first you're going to hear a little bit of Clarence Thomas, then I'm going to play Justice Alito asking questions of the Solicitor General of the United States. And they had the first trans lawyer was one of the people arguing the case. But this is the Solicitor General of the United States. I mean, it's a very, very prestigious position. I know someone, I've worked with someone who made that. And I'm telling you, this is a guy in private practice who makes more money in a year than most lawyers make in 2 or 3 careers. But there are certain ethical things. And when the case is stupid, you always have the ability as a lawyer to say, I'm not taking that case. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to embarrass myself to go out there and make this ridiculous argument. So here's Clarence Thomas asking Elizabeth Prelogar, the U.S. Solicitor General, and by the way, in 45 days, she's going to move over to another law firm. She's going to make millions of dollars a year probably. And yeah, I think that there's not justice in that situation.
I welcome the court's questions.
Much of the latter part of your opening statement suggests that it seemed to suggest that there's an outright ban on this treatment, but that's not the case. It's really for minors. So why isn't this simply a case of age classification when it comes to these treatments as opposed to a ban, as you suggested in your opening statement?
It's certainly true, Justice Thomas, that the statute classifies based on age, but it packages that age classification with a sex restriction and says that for all adolescents, you cannot take these medications if they're inconsistent with your sex. So I acknowledge that the state so far has not banned this care for adults, although I think that the arguments it's making that this isn't a sex-based line in the first place would equally apply in that context. But the court has likewise made clear that when you classify on the basis of multiple characteristics, you can't avoid heightened scrutiny just because you have a non-protected characteristic that accompanies the protected one. And if you look at it from the standpoint of the plaintiffs who are actually affected by this law, the reason I'm calling it a categorical ban is because the state has left no out for those patients to obtain these medications when there's a showing of individualized medical need. And that is, I think, a stark departure from how the state ordinarily handles issues related to measuring risks and benefits, even in the pediatric context.
Well, is there no difference if a girl takes testosterone or if a boy takes testosterone?
So the district court specifically considered this question in detail and found that with respect to the risks that the state had identified, it was not substantiated that there would be unique risks associated with the cross-sex use of the hormones.
Is there no physiological difference?
Certainly, I understand that there are biological differences between males and females, but when it came to the specific risk factors that the state was focused on, what the district court found is that many of those risk factors would exist regardless of the birth sex of who is taking those medications.
Well, I'm more interested in whether or not there is a difference in testosterone and its reaction in a male as opposed to in a female, and vice versa for estrogen?
So if you take hormones, they will prompt the development of secondary sex characteristics in whether you're a male or a female. If you take testosterone, you might develop a deeper voice register. You might have facial.
Okay, this is just, you know, this case is so much against common sense. And understand, these people are operating in our schools and affecting your children. And so I know there are a lot of Christians say you shouldn't get involved in politics because politics aren't going to save anybody or lead them to Jesus. I agree with that. But you make these statements, and I'm sorry, you ignore the effect of the law. Are you in favor of a law banning murder? That came about because of a politically enacted statute. So if you're gonna make the statement that you shouldn't fight these things, then you want anarchy. There's no middle ground there for me. I hope I'm clear on that. And look, I understand people don't like the political system, okay? But there are certain things the political system does, like red lights, stoplights. And we see this, like, I mean, did you see the guy, the insurance executive, gunned down on 6th Avenue in New York, outside the New York Hilton? I mean, right in the middle of Manhattan. And I don't think the guy's been caught yet. And by the way, a lot of people on the internet have said, well, it was an insurance executive. We're not going to help find the guy. He deserved to die because his company might have denied claims. Okay, that's fine. But do you understand where we've gone if that's the reaction of people? In New York City right now, there's a trial going on with a guy there was a guy threatening people on a subway, and he grabbed him and put him in a chokehold, and the guy died. In fact, he left after the incident was over and went home, didn't even know the guy had died. Now there's a hung jury, and the prosecutor in the case says, well, we're going to dismiss the second-degree manslaughter charge and go after the other one. I'm telling you, this is unprecedented in criminal. This is an egregious violation of criminal law on so many levels. And I saw a video of the prosecutor. She was talking about, well, you know, there was a guy, and I was prosecuting the case, and I was going to charge him with felony murder. Why was he charged with felony murder? Because he attacked a guy in an ATM, and the guy died. You do a robbery, somebody dies during the robbery, you're charged with murder. You don't have to show intent. It's called the felony murder rule. It is a bedrock of English and American common law. And she said, well, you know, I found out that the guy that robbed him at the ATM, you know, he had some bad things in his background, so I just decided not to prosecute him for murder. She's the prosecutor on the case going after the guy who saved a lot of people from this guy going crazy in the subway. Okay, so here's Justice Alito, this 1 minute, and his back and forth with the Solicitor General.
Does the category of, does transgender status apply to individuals who are gender fluid?
I think that the distinguishing characteristic is to have a birth sex that does not align with, or a gender that does not align with one's birth sex. So it may include people who have different understandings of their gender identity, but I think it is still the distinguishing characteristic of a birth sex and a gender identity that are incongruent.
Are there individuals who are born male, assigned male at birth, who at one point identify as female, but then later come to identify as male, and likewise for individuals who are assigned female at birth, at some point identify as female, identify as male, but later come to identify as female? Are there not such people?
There are such people. I agree with that, Justice.
So it's not an immutable characteristic, is it?
Well, I think people's understanding of it shifts, but the evidence shows that there is at least a strong underlying basis. And I think the normative reason for that particular consideration is whether or not this is something that someone should or could change, and whether they should have to change it in order to receive constitutional protections. And I think transgender status squarely fits within.
Okay, you almost need like little sock puppets, to kind of track what they're talking, because it's so crazy. Even Justice Alito, one of the brightest men in the world, has trouble following the thought pattern to ask a important question. Somebody suggested during the oral argument that one of the ways to solve this problem is to change the statute of limitations for malpractice claims. So in other words, if you want to do this to kids, then we should enact a law that says the statute of limitations for medical malpractice, in case the kid changes his mind later, and you've cut off body parts, you've sterilized them, you haven't had informed consent, you may have done this without the parental involvement. So doctors, if you're so stinking strong in what you think you should do, then let's make the statute of limitations until that kid turns 28 or 30 years old. Instead of like 1 year after their majority. And they might cite at 20, what did I do? And this happens all the time. And Justice Alito went into reports like the Cass report from the UK. And essentially he said, I don't think you read those reports. And you have to think that maybe she didn't. Okay, so let's talk about the Middle East. We could talk a long time. So I'm going to do a podcast live tonight with Kurt Reed at Harvest Chapel out in Las Vegas. I think we're going to start about 9 p.m. Eastern. Have some others this week. I'll post them on my social media. So that'll be live tonight. I'm sure we're going to talk about Syria, and we're going to talk about all the things I didn't get to talk about this morning, because I don't want to keep you for... there's some weeks when I get to about Tuesday, Wednesday, I think, I'm going to have like a 30-minute update on Sunday. And you all know that that's never going to happen. But this one really went. So let's just remind you what the different fronts that Israel is facing. And by the way, Israel has done fantastic, I think, way beyond expectations. For example, I was talking to people early on with the situation with Hamas in Gaza. There were fears that if Israel goes in there, they're going to lose 15 to 20,000 soldiers. Not just casualties, dead, because of the situation there. Someone was killed yesterday, and I think the total now is 809. But about half of those were from October 7th itself. So between Gaza and Lebanon, and every death is a major tragedy and problem, they've only lost under 500 soldiers in the active battles since. To me, that almost seems like there's some kind of divine intervention going on. Because look, Israel did not deal with the problem for years. Now they got to deal with the problem. And there's a lot of political fallout going on. And I might talk about that this morning, maybe tonight. So Gaza's front number one. The next front is Hezbollah. Ceasefire in place right now. Israel's still attacking Hezbollah because Hezbollah is violating the ceasefire. But that was put in place. Then you have the Hezbollah and other Iranian-supported militias in Syria, particularly along the border along the Golan Heights, southern Syria. The fourth one would be Iraq. The fifth one would be Iran. The sixth one would be the Houthis in Yemen. And the seventh would be the area of Judea Samaria, also called improperly called the West Bank. And this one we'll talk about a little bit later. social media, that type of thing, the anti-Semitism out there is just, it's really off the charts. And it's everywhere. And we'll talk about that. And then the ninth one I mentioned, this was like archaeology and history. They're trying to change all of that. So in Syria, they've been fighting this civil war for almost 14 years. We were in Israel in March, I've said this many times, March of 2011. We're staying at the south end of the Sea of Galilee. We got up in the morning, beautiful Sea of Galilee is like glass, beautiful morning, and 30 miles away in a city called Dara in southern Syria, literally all hell was breaking loose. Riots, they'd had a multi-year drought, food prices were way up, people couldn't afford food, they got upset with the regime, and the Assad regime has been brutal. So since then, in that Syrian civil war that's gone on since then, between 500,000 and 1 million Syrians have been killed. Not many have been imprisoned. The Assad regime has run some of the most brutal prisons on planet Earth. Millions of people have fled. A bunch of Syrians have gone to Lebanon, about 1.5 million. And in a country of 5 million people, you add 1.5 million people who have no jobs and everything, you really tax that country's resources, economy, government systems, and that type of thing. Nearly 3 million went to Jordan, and another 3.3 million went to Turkey, and another 2 million or so left and went into Europe. And we know that Europe is pretty destabilized right now. I communicate regularly. I have some friends that live in the UK, and one of them was in London this week, and he just says, I cannot believe that this is London. What's going on there? If you criticize them, you go to jail. It's sort of like what happens here. You know, this guy who was protecting people on the subway got $200,000 bail. The judge wouldn't reduce it. And then they show other people who arrested around the same time for assault and battery and injury to someone, and they were released on bail and the charges were dropped. Because they were of a different, as our Solicitor General would say, a different racial classification than the guy who was charged. And it's interesting. So this is a graphic out of the New York Times showing the change. But this was a few days ago, so it's like, it's ancient history. So I did a couple interviews this week, and I'm like, I think they're out of date. There's no shelf life on things when you talk about things related to Bible prophecy now because they change so quickly. And you hope, like, you put up something, you spend all this time preparing it, and you hope that it's relevant for 24 hours. I mean, it's literally that, it seems to be that things move by that quickly. So, for example, here's an article. This is from November 18th. What is that? So today's the 8th. 20 days ago, less than 3 weeks ago, this article appeared at the Cradle. I guess that's November 19th. Russia boosts presence near Israeli-occupied Golan Heights to help Syria prevent escalations. Now, what was Russia doing? Well, Russia had seen what Israel was doing to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Russia has a relationship with Iran. It tries to protect Iran. It tries to protect Syria. Russia got a warm water port and an air base in Syria and was able to exercise influence in the Middle East. So they didn't want Israel to do to Syria what it had done to Hezbollah in Lebanon. It had totally decimated everything. Do you know that I think it was less than 3 months ago, we had the operation that's now known as the Grim Beepers. The pagers and that type of thing that exploded in Lebanon, followed on by walkie-talkies the next day, followed by bombing in-person meetings, followed by taking out 3 towers to take down the head of Hezbollah, the head of the snake in Lebanon, Nasrallah. The whole command structure of Hezbollah has been decimated. the whole command structure of their Radwan Brigade, which was going to do a Hamas-style invasion of northern Israel, has been completely destroyed. Southern Lebanon up to the Litani River is effectively under the control of Israel. People have evacuated. And now you have the problem with you have the people from southern Lebanon evacuating up to northern Lebanon. They can't get into Syria. And now you have a bunch of Syrians leaving Syria that were people that were loyal to the Assad regime that are a little bit concerned about the people that are taking over. And so here was this article. It actually was based on an article that a little blurb that was in Al Akbar newspaper, the Cradle. And the Cradle, by the way, Cradle is a pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, left-wing publication. So you just need to understand, if you read the Cradle, they've got great graphics, by the way. But so you can be a complete nut politically, and on the Israel issue and do great graphics. So I'm bipartisan when I look for good graphics. But so here's what this article said. This is the article. And it says, Russia strengthens its presence on the outskirts of the Golan. In a new Russian attempt to prevent any Israeli escalation against Syria, Russian forces in Syria announced that they have reinforced their presence at 9 observation points near the separation zone on the borders of the occupied Syrian territories in the Golan Heights in the countryside of Dara and Quneitra. And if you've been up to the Golan Heights, you'll stand there in the Golan Heights and you can look at Quneitra, you can look at no man's land, right? And it's right there. And so Russia says, well, we got to prevent Israel from escalating. And everybody, Russia makes a lot of noise. They make a lot of threats. They're threatening nuclear war against everybody. And they may still do it, by the way. They have the power to do that. And I'm probably a little bit more concerned about that today than I have been, because what's happened? Russia's gone. They left Syria. It's unbelievable. So this was New York Times the other day talking about Russia and Iran vow to help al-Assad as he beats back the rebels. This was just like Tuesday or Wednesday in the New York Times. Big articles all over the papers. Everybody's talking about it. Assad's going to beat these people back. These are ragtag groups of rebels. They don't really know that much what they're doing. They're not that well organized. Nothing's changed in Syria for 5 or 6 years. And look at it. Well, it says here, the individuals targeted in Syria this was, I think this was from Jonathan Spire. With Israeli forces in daily action in Gaza and South Lebanon, and intermittent drone and missile attacks continuing from Iraq and Yemen, one front in the regional conflict currently underway has tended to be ignored, Syria. Yet the available evidence shows that Israeli strikes against Lebanese Hezbollah and Iranian targets in Syria have increased significantly over the last 2 months. The individuals targeted in Syria have included veteran and prominent leaders and operatives of the Iran-led regional axis. So what Israel's been doing, they've been taking out Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militias and their leaders in Syria. They've attacked major weapons installations, manufacturing facilities, that type of thing. But listen, that is often referred to as the campaign between the wars. So we had the war of Hezbollah in 2006, and we know another one's coming. So what do we do in the meantime? And from my looking at it, I think that what they did in the meantime, while effective, didn't work. Hezbollah built up tens of thousands of rockets. They built up 50 to 100,000 fighters. They got them trained fighting on behalf of Assad in Syria against these rebel groups. It was a major problem. It did not work. So let's look at the maps of what happened in Syria, which is very interesting. So there's a website you can go to. It's called liveuamap.com. And they have maps. They have the Ukrainian conflict, they have Palestine, they have Israel, they have Syria. So this is from the Syria portion of this. So remember November of 2014, about 10 years ago, the black area in Syria and Iraq, so you see Syria on the left, Iraq on the right, Mosul is up here in the middle. You have the Kurdish areas, Erbil and the major Kurdish city in Iraq. And that black area is who? That's ISIS, the Islamic State. Remember all the havoc that they put on the people of Syria and Iraq? And it took a lot of effort to beat them back. It took a couple years. And by the way, Iran did it, Russia did it, Syria did it, the US did it. Everybody was fighting against them. A bunch of tweets today. People saying, the reason why ISIS never attacked Israel is the Jews created them. Well, maybe even ISIS, as evil they are, even as I've said, that some of these evil people that are rich and that type of thing, even rich people have accountants. And even evil people have the ability to say, well, that's probably not a good idea. It's probably not a good idea to attack Israel because you will get your lunch handed to you. In short, because they're a small country, they don't have any options. They have to fight, and they have to fight to the end, and they have to get rid of the problems. So ISIS got rid of, so this is the Times of London this way, Assad regime shocked by rebels' lightning advance. Look at how this happened. So this was November 28th, a little over a week ago. This is, and so I want you to see. So let's look at what these different parties are. The reddish area, that's the Assad regime. The dark red areas are still enclaves that ISIS is pretty active in and effectively controls. By the way, somebody got really upset when I said Syria wasn't a real country. I don't know, every podcast that I listened to this week said Syria's not a real country. David Wormser, Yotanan Adiri, who I'll play a little bit of, everybody says the Syria's not, because it was created by Europeans at the end of, in the midst of World War I, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't understand the tribal culture. They didn't understand the competing interests. So it's like, well, let's draw this line here and we'll make a country and we'll call it Syria. We'll draw this line here and we'll make this country and we'll call it Iraq. And we'll give this guy, and we'll do Jordan, and we'll give the guy that the Saudis are taking out of Saudi Arabia, we'll give him a Hashemite kingdom of Jordan and the Hashemite kingdom of Iraq. Same family. The same family runs Jordan today, King Abdullah II. Anyway, they didn't know what they were doing, and we're living with all these fault lines, literal fault lines, geopolitical fault lines that were created. So the greenish area, that's kind of rebel groups. The blue area here on the lower left, that's the Golan Heights. The green area up in the north, that's rebel groups up around Idlib. And then you see in lighter green areas, those are Turkish-controlled areas. And then the yellow would be Kurdish. And nobody likes anybody. I mean, so the yellow areas, the Kurds saying, hey, we're not involved in this. Leave us alone. Turkey has done 4,000 or more bombing runs into Kurdish areas in the past few months. I mean, do you even hear about that? I mean, I've seen estimates of how many people might have been ethnically cleansed in the Kurdish areas. I haven't been able to confirm it, but it's a very, very big number. It is way beyond what Israel's accused of doing down in Gaza. How many marches have taken place at Columbia, Harvard, Yale, the Oxford Union, protesting all the dead Arabs in Syria, all the dead Kurds from Turkish incursions? The answer is zero. So the green area, this a little bit darker green area, that's the rebels. These are the ones who advanced and took this over. So look what happened. So from November 28th to today is, so today's what, the 8th? So that's 8 plus 3, so 10 or 11 days. This is what's happened. So you're going to see, this is the 29th, and you can see that there's a little bit of change. Now that the rebels are progressing, now they take over more. They got down to Aleppo, took that over. They made it down to Homs. So this is December 2nd. Not much change. Then all of a sudden they started taking over a bigger area. December 4th, the area had grown. Now they're advancing down towards Damascus, down here in the south. Really not too far from the Golan Heights. If you're in the Golan Heights, you're within 30 miles of Damascus. That's how close and Damascus is only 50 miles from Beirut, if you could fly there. Kind of hard to get a flight, though, from one country to another there, particularly now. So then this is December 6th. So this is Friday. So you see the change from the 5th to the 6th of how the rebels are doing. And then the 7th. And then the 8th. And then what I was able to pull off, this is what the rebels put up. And this is what it is today. That's stunning. That's shocking how quickly that happened. So what you find, and so there were tweets going out. So for example, here's War Monitor, a good open source intelligence guy. The Russian embassy in Damascus has urged all Russian citizens still in Syria to leave the country without delay. That was on Friday morning. And by the way, a couple days ago, so as I'm watching this, everybody said this red area, Damascus and these areas. So the white is Lebanon. And so this red area that wraps around Lebanon and on the coast, that's the Alawite region. So the Alawites, a lot of people say that they are Shia related. But according to an Islamic expert who I heard interviewed the other day, Dr. Mordecai Kadar, on Yishai Fleischer's channel, said, no, the Alawites, by almost all other sects of Islam, are considered to be idolaters. But, well, why will Iran do so? Because they will help Iran against Israel. That's the ultimate goal. Just like Hamas are Sunni, but Iran funds them because they want to get Israel. So the Alawites, that's the Assad family. And so everybody said, well, Russia's involved. They've got an air base there. They've got a port there. Certainly Russia's not going to let this whole thing get taken over. That was 2 days ago. And as I said, here's the map this morning. Assad is gone. He's resigned. And it was interesting. So there have been all the others I mentioned. There have been all these articles. Here's Jonathan Spires, Israel's hunting ground in Syria, talking about the good work Israel was doing in Syria. And it changed. So here's an interview. Now, this was done on the 5th. So that would be Thursday. Dan Senor interviewed Yotanan Adiri. And this is probably going to be 10 minutes. But I think it's 3 parts. I think it's very important you listen to Yotanan. But he was talking about, what does this all mean? What's going on here and what's going to happen? And so he's going to talk like Syria is still under the control of the Assad clan. It's not. 2 days later, it's not. They're gone. So here you go.
2018 is the point. Somewhere in 2018, I recall, we watched the normalization of Assad, meaning Assad was a pariah in the Arab world. Many friends of mine, contacts I have throughout the Arab world, talked about Assad in the Sunni Arab world the way they talk about the Iranian regime, that he was just completely the enemy of the other side. And then something happened and largely because of what he had done the previous 6-7 years. And then something happened in 2018 where we saw the soft normalization of Assad.
I think the culmination was, less than half a year ago, Assad was accepted in the Arab League.
returned, accepted back.
Reaccepted, exactly, in the Arab League. Now, what happened in 2018 was that the Russians and the Turks and the Iranians enforced the ceasefire on Assad, each taking their pound of flesh, right? The Russians, in essence, owned northwest Syria, all the port cities. They have their own base there. In what is, in a way, is sort of sovereign Russia, that area from a military perspective. The Turks called the north, Idlib and those areas where they have this long-standing conflict with, the Kurds of northeast Syria. And Iran, in essence, turned Syria into its backyard, through which it continued to supply Hezbollah. And that's what's called in the IDF. That was when the IDF initiated something that was called the War Between the Wars, which was a nickname for an Air Force campaign to thwart those resupply lines through Syria, which was basically, the highway from Tehran for the Revolutionary Guards.
And then just the flare-ups, like at the Syrian-Turkish border?
Right. So, so Turkey, in essence, as part of the Astana process, said, this area in the border is not going to be Syrian sovereignty. We're not going to allow the Kurds, maybe in brackets, to say, Turkey is fighting its war in the east. It's a long-standing war against what's called, against the freedom of Kurdistan. And acted, by the way, formally. They launched an attack a couple of years back called Euphrates Peace, in which they actually incurred into Syria. So the Turks have never stepped away after the Astana process.
I just want to come back to something you alluded to. So there's sort of this grand bargain between Russia, Turkey, Syria, and Iran, all built around clearly protecting Assad, so keeping Assad and his regime in power. And so while we often talked about Iran having tentacles throughout the region, it's largely, if you look at the pattern, it's supporting non-state actors like Hezbollah, like the Houthis. Here's a case where Iran is completely propping up a state actor, Assad, and actually relying on non-state actors to protect them, like Hezbollah. Hezbollah was effectively fighting for the last number of years in Syria to protect Assad. What do all these other actors have in it? What's in it for them?
I think, by the way, what we're seeing is the coercive power of truth here, right? I mean, Assad is supposedly a state actor, but for all accounts and purposes, this was a failed state, and Iran enjoyed that fact. So did Russia, and so did Turkey. In parallel to that, there was a war on ISIS that Iran also benefited from, and in a way also declared itself as a positive actor in that context. Iran navigated this situation to its benefit, and that grand bargain held until very recently. And I think what we're seeing in this eruption is that powers that were part of this grand bargain in the Astana process in 2018 are completely different actors in 2024.
Okay, so now let's fast forward to today. Let's talk about each of these actors and how their dynamics and their relationships with one another and with their own, geopolitical positioning has changed. Let's start with Russia. Russia's bogged down now with its own war. So talk a little bit about the implications for Russia's role in Syria.
So I think the best way of looking at the change is looking at it through Ankara, right? Through Erdogan. Erdogan looks at this. 2018, he's part of this arrangement, the grand bargain. And if you will, these are three equal partners forcing their own interests on a failed regime. That was the picture. That's where we left it last, right? 2018, that's when it subsided. Fast forward 6 years, Turkey's very strong. It is that sort of middle ground between Russia and Ukraine. It is a very strong player in NATO, albeit less obedient and less, I would say, productive, as other members of NATO would want it to be. And it's gaining force, and since 2018 has been making incursions into Syria with no ramifications from the international community or from the US. So it has kind of carved an immunity for itself, and it is indeed stronger than it.
So I'll stop it there. So what Erdogan did was he went into northern Syria. And this has long been, you can see articles from Foreign Policy back in 2016, 2017. Erdogan had this desire to build this Turkish area in Syria. For example, here's a tweet this week somebody wrote, and the the title of the tweet. But if you look at the map closely, you see Ankara, you see Istanbul, but you see Turkey has gone further down to the south. And this has been true. Here's another map and it was called the National Covenant. And Turkey's been doing this. For example, you see Turkey here controls all of Cyprus. They've shut down Cyprus. They also have this thing called the blue water or something doctrine. And they think that most of the Eastern Mediterranean belongs to them because of the way they interpret. It's the way Erdogan sees it. He wants to restore the Islamic Caliphate. In fact, he gave a speech just yesterday in Ankara. It was about Palestine. And see the Gaziantep, or whatever they call it. Just as we want to see a Gaziantep with economic development, social peace, internal peace, and security, we also have the same wishes for Aleppo. This is just complete, absolute propaganda. We have been living side by side in this geography for 1,000 years, and God willing, we will continue to live together in unity and harmony for many centuries to come. To understand Islamic, he takes the long view. He's concerned about the next election. I don't think he's running again, but he takes the long view. If it takes us centuries to accomplish this, that's Allah's will. And he's a radical Sunni Muslim Brotherhood guy. And that's why when I look at Daniel chapter 8, I see if this beast comes from the west, it could be Turkey. Some people say, well, it's got to be Greece, but Greece is nothing right now. And part of that area was Turkey back in those days. So maybe that's what Daniel was seeing, was this something at the end times where Turkey would go against Iran, take over Iran. And the Ottomans, when they controlled things, they sort of let the countries have a lot of their own character, but they controlled everything. They were very much like the Romans in some respects there. So back to Dan Senor and Yotanan, Adiri. Here's a little bit more.
But of those three countries, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, in Iraq post-Saddam, the Kurds, and I was, full disclosure, involved with this during the political transition after the U.S. left Iraq or gave sovereignty to the Iraqis, the Kurds were integrated into the formal national governmental leadership of Iraq, of the national government of Iraq. Look at people like Barham Saleh and others, who's a Kurdish leader and a national Iraqi government leader. But in Iran and Turkey, there's no such thing. The Kurds aren't integrated into the national leadership at all. Specifically in the case of Turkey, they're viewed by Erdogan as a threat to the national leadership. So Kurds in Syria, to the extent that they are perceived to give fuel, not literal fuel, I mean metaphorical fuel and support to the Kurds in Turkey, that is viewed as a threat to Erdogan. And Erdogan's attitude is, if Syria can't get a handle on its Kurdish problem, we'll do it.
100%. Yeah, Dan, you're 100% right. And I think that, my parents are both, one side is Iraqi, the other side is Iranian. The story of the Kurds is a story I've heard, from both sides many, many years. And both in Iran and in Iraq, there is a sense of at least recognizing the distinct cultural heritage and nature of this nation. Turkey won't have any of it. Erdogan, powered by his vision for neo-Ottomanism, wants to go back to the days of the Ottoman Empire when Idlib and those areas of Aleppo were very close to the Turkish side, very much so, more than they were connected to Damascus. And so there is somewhat of a revisionist vision that Erdogan wants to bring forward. Some of it has to do with the ethnic cleansing of the Kurds and pushing them out and delegitimizing their right for self-determination. A lot of it has to do with pure power politics that relates to Turkey's current position in the Middle East. They're emboldened. They are an important player on the global stage, and I think it's important to recognize that at this juncture in history, it seems like the future of the Middle East will be decided upon by three countries, none of which is Arab, which is Israel, Iran, and Turkey. So this is what's at play right now.
Now, again, just in many following, this comes back to what we're rooting for. Many people who care about Israel and Israel's security and Israeli safety are watching these events and saying, great, like here's another surrogate ally of Iran, meaning the regime of Bashar Assad, under siege. And the dominoes like are just falling throughout the region, all to the advantage of Israel. However, the rebels pressing this offensive are not exactly the kind of actors that Israel would want on its own border, meaning that, yes, they're Syrian Sunnis, but they are also Syrian Sunni Islamists and extremists and willing to use violence in a very orchestrated way that could become its own headache for Israel, rather than Israel just having to manage the threat from a sovereign state in the form of the government of Syria. So that's why this has been a little perplexing for those who are looking at this in terms of what's in Israel's interest.
Yeah. There's a famous saying from one of the Israeli leaders back in the 70s. Whenever there's an eruption like that in the Arab world, I wish luck on both sides, right? And I think that's not the case right now. I think fundamentally, Israel dealt a very severe blow to the Iranian quest for hegemony. And that's the lens through which Israel is looking at this situation right now. Now, there are two ways to go about this. Is Israel sort of looking at it from a defensive play, knowing that January 20th, the Trump administration steps up? It now has a far more complex world to deal with. We saw China yesterday declaring they're not going to allow certain types of critical minerals for the global supply chain. So this is heating up. Turkey is emboldened, and also within NATO. Now there's this situation unraveling in Syria, but Israel has its eye on the ball, which is the Iranian quest for hegemony in the region, and obviously its nuclear plan and program. So that is sort of the rationale for not getting involved and basically saying, keep your eye on the ball. There's a new American administration, and Iran is in a certain position, and we now need to kind of, outside of Israel, need to understand what happened to the Israeli soul is what happens after you've been invaded, not after a terror attack. My wife comes from Switzerland. We've been in Israel for 15 years. Born and raised in Israel. I've seen terror attacks of different kinds and different scale. We've weathered, rocket barrages and so on. The first 3 weeks after the invasion of October 7, we were walking around Tel Aviv thinking to ourselves, is there a sleeper cell? It has one of those Toyotas, right, managed to come in here, and are they kind of wandering around? I think that's a critical piece. What happened there was an invasion of barbaric hordes, what we kind of saw in the Middle Ages. I think that's important in terms of nomenclature. And the second piece here is, I think I'm very optimistic vis-a-vis the future of Israel. I think that the flip side of what you said about Yahya Sinwar is Israel's strategic posture compared to, say, 14, 15 months ago is incredibly improved at the price and at the pain of more than 2,000 people dead, of the massacre, of the invasion. We paid a dear price. But I would say that the results of the campaign at this point, and God willing that the hostages will be released as part of this catharsis and building a new page, a new era in Israel. But fundamentally, with a decapitated Hezbollah, with a naked Iran, as you say, and I think the most important thing, Dan, psychologically, the fear factor that paralyzed Israel in activating vis-a-vis Iran, when 120 airplanes came back all safe, is gone. And if I'm sitting in Tehran, I'm worried. I'm worried about Syria. I'm worried about my hands chopped off in Hezbollah and the Houthis. And I'm very worried about Israel losing its fear factor in not coming close to my sovereign territory.
So that's interesting. So last Sunday, David Wormser at JNS published a great article. He's a Middle East expert, did a great interview with Carolyn Glick this week. You can go look that up. But he published an article, listen to this. So Yotan and Nadiri talked about the tectonic earthquake waiting for the volcano thing. That's where I got the title for this week's update. Wormser titled this at JNS, Reflections on the Outlandish, Navigating the Strategic Earthquake in the Fertile Crescent. So there was this common theme running through all the analysts that were talking about. This is an earthquake. At Substack, where the article was also published, it was titled this. So this is a week ago today. Prepare for the disintegration of Syria and the rise of Imperial Turkey. And so that's what's going on. And so when we've talked in Bible prophecy for a lot that Turkey is very, very important and central, that's important. Somebody suggested that this would be a better thing for the chess piece of Syria. It's the soldiers running away. Here's this, these are some of the Arab editorial cartoons that happen. That's Lebanon. Lebanon's got problems. This is some of the people at Ynet writing, and the title of it is The History in Syria, the Assad Regime Overthrown. So Assad has fled. There are reports not yet confirmed that an airplane maybe carrying him has crashed, and he may not be alive. Now, Moscow has said, no, he's going to give a speech at 8 o'clock Moscow time today. So I don't know what time Moscow time is. So he's supposedly, they say he's in Russia. But understand, in this whole area, I mean, here was attacks that were done on Hezbollah fighters that were fleeing caravans. Israel just took out hundreds of them over the past day. This is a picture in Damascus. These are Syrian army military uniforms. They were taking their uniforms off on the street and putting other clothes on. And they were leaving. And, here's one of the statues of the Assad clan. They've torn all these things down. This is even South Front. This is a pro-Syrian website. The highlight of the international developments of the day was the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's power in Syria. Islamist and armed opposition forces entered Damascus. Syrian Prime Minister Mohammed al-Jali said that he was ready to cooperate with any administration chosen by the Syrian people and to take any measures for a peaceful transfer of power. A hodgepodge of pro-Turkish fighters, jihadist terrorists, armed pro-U.S. opposition to other elements occupied key cities of the country. So listen, how did this happen? So there's a guy that I follow on Twitter named Charles Lister, who's a Syrian expert, and he said this didn't happen overnight. The jihadists, a lot of them came out of ISIS, a lot of them came out of Al-Qaeda. The guy that is now the head of this group, he makes a very good appearance. He did an interview on CNN. Looks like a normal person, but he was the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria for a while. That's not good. And so Israel's looking like, look, Assad they could manage, they thought. Now they have the whole country's run by radical Islamic jihadists, and Russia's, for all intents and purposes, is withdrawn, and Syria's up there in the north saying, now's our shot to extend our border to the south and start to reconstitute our Ottoman Empire. But even this morning, this is Sunday Times of the UK, Assad's regime hanging by a thread. Well, that's old news. That's history now. He's gone. This is inside. Dictator is on the brink. Rebels are far from saviors, which is correct. Here's the Israel-Golan border. Israel has now moved into parts of the Golan Heights to increase a buffer zone. And by the way, what they're finding up in Idlib and some other places where these Islamists were reconstituting, they put in place treaties with other Islamic groups. They put in a command and control structure that was very modern in the way that it would operate. And they worked very hard to develop A couple things. Tunnels. That's why the Syrian army fled. They didn't know where these guys were coming from. It's like Yotanan said, when they invaded us from Gaza, we didn't know for weeks whether there's some guys got through and they were going to start things again in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. So there was a fear, and by the way, don't call it a terror attack on October 7th. It was an invasion. I think that's very good advice. So now Israel's looking like, okay, we got to increase our buffer zone. So they've moved in. They have actually taken over the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. And so they've expanded the territory of the Golan Heights. They've taken over the no man's land. They actually protected some of the UN contingents that are there to kind of help keep the peace. They were being attacked by rebels or Hezbollah. But what happened? So Israel did such a good job on Hamas and Hezbollah and then they did the air attack. All the planes came back. They took out all their air defenses in Iran. And the jihadis in Syria said, Iran is weak, now is our moment. And so what's happened? Russia's withdrawn, the Syrian army is gone, everybody's resigned, everybody's quit. They're going to try to work with the Islamists. Iran pulled everybody out. What Syrian army was able to flee took everything to Iraq. So it's not over. But they planned for it. So here's a picture. This is the guy on the left when he was head of Al-Qaeda. Here he is today giving an interview to CNN. He's gone from radical jihadist to a blazer-wearing revolutionary so far. Do you really think that this is good news for Israel, that now these guys are in control of the border? So now he said, we don't have any intention of invading right now. So far, right? I don't trust him at all. So you can look up the interview that he did on CNN. And this is Richard Goldberg, an expert on the Middle East. Team Biden spent 4 years trying to make a deal with Iran and last few months trying to save Hezbollah and normalize Assad. Who is most responsible for degrading Hezbollah, stripping Tehran's defenses, and hastening Assad's fall? The man Biden targeted for regime change, Bibi Netanyahu. And Carolyn Glick has a good article at JNS. It's linked. There will be a link to it in the notes below this video on YouTube and probably on Rumble. Talk about they're trying to take out Biden. They're trying to take out Netanyahu. It's sort of a bloodless coup that they're trying to do. They're trying to get rid of him. And by the way, in the past, Gantz, who's one of the leaders who might take over, or Yair Lapid, who was prime minister for a short time, they said, hey, we know the solution. We'll give the Golan Heights to the rebel groups in Syria. Problem solved. So you can't let those people, I know people don't like Netanyahu, but then my question always is, so who? Who else do you have to step forward? And maybe somebody will, but I don't know. Here's a video. This is kind of what the rebel groups are doing is they're going through these prisons of the Assad regime and they're releasing all the prisoners. Some of these people have been kept in dungeons for over 2 decades. This guy, media got him and tried to interview him. They asked him, what's your name and where are you from? And he says, I don't remember. What Assad did to his own people was brutal. And you never see anybody marching about it or anything. It's absolutely shocking. This is Michael Rubin's article at Middle East Forum. Would an Islamist Syria be worse than a weak Assad? And the answer is, right now, you can probably manage it, but you better watch out because it's not over. And we know there are prophecies about Ezekiel 38 and 39 and all this stuff that we think is coming in the future. Question is when. Nobody knows for sure. But you see a lot of those elements coming together. But Russia is gone. So I have questions whether Russia is part of this or not. But let's just assume that Russia is. But what does it say in the early part of Ezekiel? I will put hooks in your jaw and drag you back. Hooks and drag back. That implies to me that whoever it is, have left, and now they're going to be drawn back in. Now, so is it closer to that happening or not? I don't know the answer to that. So I want to talk about this. This is Canada and Ottawa. Up here, Jewish doctors fear widespread anti-Semitism. Doctors, the word is, well, here it is. Signatories to this survey reportedly subsequently faced coordinated doxing campaigns targeting their workplaces. Jewish lawyers, they're Jewish doctors in Ontario, Canada, which is like just across the border. You can see it across the lake on if there ever is a clear day in Ohio. That's theoretically. Phil Berger, a media spokesman for the group and distinguished Canadian medical practitioner himself, later told the Toronto Star, the medical center has become the epicenter of anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto. This morning in the London Times, Jewish doctors and patients say they face a rising tide of anti-Semitism in the National Health Service in the UK. Big article. They're afraid to go get treated. This week, the Great Debate Society at the Oxford Union, this is an article by one of the people who debated the question was, something like, is Israel a apartheid state and are they committing genocide? So they had 3 people opposed to the resolution. By the way, the resolution by the Oxford students, these elite university students, they said, yes, Israel is an apartheid state and committing genocide. The vote was like 278 to 65 or something like that. So there were 3 or 4 people on the side, and the Oxford Union said, we're going to put up all the videos. They haven't put up all the videos. They've been selectively edited. Some have not been put up. The guy whose father was the founder of Hamas, who's been a very strong spokesperson, his video is not put up. You can get the audio of it on some of the Twitter feeds. They're not supposed to record it, but they did anyway because they knew this would happen. What's the technical? Chucklehead that was running the debate, he would take pictures with the pro-Palestinian side, but not with the pro-Israel side. And this is what happened. This is an Israeli Arab journalist who got up and spoke incredibly passionate speech. You can find it on YouTube, Oxford Union Debates. And here's what happened to him at the debate. Yosef Haddad. He'd finished debating, and they said, we're going to get rid of him. That guy in the center up there, that's the chucklehead I was referring to earlier, just so you have a player history. They kicked him out of the debate. And I'm telling you, the conduct of the students and crowd and faculty there was atrocious. I'm going to play you a little bit. I'm not going to play you Haddad, his speech, but I will play you a little bit, a couple minutes of the great Natasha Hausdorff, who is a treasure, and we love lawyers around here, and she's very, very good. So she got up and she was defending Israel and arguing against the proposition. This is a very powerful, so just maybe 3 minutes of this.
Hamas has wounded us. They are responsible for all the destruction. All the destruction is on them. May God settle the score with Hamas, take revenge on Hamas. They destroyed our lives. These are the words of Palestinians in Gaza. Leaving Jabalia a couple of weeks ago, interviewed by Israeli journalist Ohad Chemo from Channel 12. These are the voices that Hamas and the members of the proposition don't want you to hear. These are the voices they want you to silence. We want you to rule, they say. We don't want Hamas. They took away the humanitarian aid. We will be killed if we say anything. The Jews bring us food, give us humanitarian corridor. May God take revenge on those who uprooted and killed us. Hamas. All of the falsehoods we have heard from the proposition this evening, their support for terror, the strengthening, essentially, of the oppressors, not just Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Houthis, other Iranian proxies in Iraq and in Syria. They oppress Palestinians and Israelis alike. Now, this disgraceful motion and the pretty shameful manner in which it has been handled this evening discredits this once illustrious institution. And that Jewish students have also felt intimidated from attending tonight is an extremely sad state of affairs. But I think anyone watching this debate will probably understand why. This is a dark moment in the Oxford Union's history, and as a member of this institution and a committed attendee in my time at this university, I think it is a very sad day on that front too. Now, those who cannot argue their case flee like cowards, like Norman Finkelstein, who pulled out at the last moment and in fact now seems to be scheduled to speak tomorrow unopposed, or like Muhammad al-Kurd, who also, like a coward, left after his speech because he could not face the truth that you have heard from the opposition benches. This debate has been predicated on a slew of falsehoods and misinformation. And in answer to the lady's point from the floor, red lines have been crossed this evening. I don't just refer to support for terrorism and to law enforcement watching. I do highlight Section 12(1)(a) of the Terrorism Act 2000. Calling the 7th of October a heroic act is something that is and ought to be recognized as unlawful in this country. But we've also heard made-up facts, made-up allegations, made-up quotes. No, Ben-Gurion did not say that he wanted to expel the Arabs. He said that attackers would be removed. He called on the Arabs to join the Jews in building the state of Israel. And his quote was, "We do not want to expel the Arabs. We do not have to expel the Arabs." The Israeli Arab who was ejected from this chamber in a pretty shameful development and an exhibition of double standards, which unfortunately Israelis, both Jewish and Arab, have come to acknowledge and expect. He is proof of the 20% of Israel's population that are the only free Arabs in the Middle East, that live with full citizen rights, and that put the lie to everything that you have heard from the opposition this evening. I dream, in fact, of a day when people stop making up those falsehoods, those allegations, those lies, when people stop making up those quotes, because even Benny Morris acknowledged he was mistaken when he reported it. And a little bit of research, ladies and gentlemen, which is something this university is so good, I think, at instilling in its students, would have assisted the opposition substantially in this debate. We heard the essence, essentially, of the advice, the optimism from the proposition benches. The Israelis, what should they do? They should live in Palestine and under Palestinian rule. We saw the result of two reservists losing their way and finding themselves in Ramallah in the year 2000. When they went to a local police station for help, they were lynched. Their livers were eaten. And that image of one of their attackers holding up his bloodied hands to the window towards the baying crowd below, that image of the red hand has been a central part of the propaganda initiative so that Hollywood members have been wearing red badges and celebrating the slaughter of Jews and urging it to continue. This is not a chicken and an egg scenario.
Okay, so go watch them. Spend a couple hours at the Oxford Union YouTube channel, and watch the opposition. Watch this son of an Israeli general, Michael Peled, who called, as Natasha noted, what happened on October 7th an act of heroism. And what she said about those two reservists who have wandered into Ramallah, which is just a few miles from Jerusalem, my friends. They were lynched. You've seen the pictures of the bloody hands. That's now the symbol that they use. In fact, so I promised to get to this, and I'm not going to get to it because I'm over time already. So The Economist does these things at the end of each year. The World Ahead 2024. And they do have some occultic, predictive. Sometimes they're just a little bit strange. So here's the new one, World Ahead 2025. What do you see down here in the lower right-hand corner? Red hand. And then if you look, you see here, you see the nuclear symbol up here in the left, but that's in an eyeball. And on the right, you see another eyeball, which is Franklin from the $100 bill. So what are they? So they're trying to convey a message here. And I talked to Tony at Minute to Midnight this week, and we went through one. Like, this was the Rough Guide to Hell. This was December of 2012 that they published this. And it's kind of interesting if you look at it. This is, look, what do you see up here? You see a hang glider and a guy called Hamas. You see Bibi Netanyahu here. And in the middle, you see a cloud called Wrath. And here in the Lake of Fire, you see Putin, Assad, Baby Ken looking on, U.S. Uncle Sam drunk on oil. And then down here in the corner, you see His Highness Hussein Obama going down the river on his pride boat. 12 years ago. The more things go. And so they've done this. I mean, so here's the articles. This is 2015, 2016. And there's all kinds of symbols in there on all these. Here's 2017. That was, remember the tarot cards? That, because this is what it says, Planet Trump. And they were doing all these predictions, and they were predicting chaos. And then they had the icons, sort of the technology type thing, and all the different, and all of them have something to do. Here's the world in 2019, and here's the four horsemen of the apocalypse there between Putin and China. And then everything was backwards because that's kind of an occultic trick. So, for example, you'll read Putin's pipelines. That was 2019. I mean, and so they look at the world and everything. They have facial recognition there. They have Trump. I mean, it's kind of creepy. And then in 2021, it was, then they had the world in 2020, which was like an eye chart. And if you dig into that, you'll find a lot of things. You'll see Trump, Brexit, and then they had the casino, the world in 2021, world in 2022, and 2023. And you see a lot of the same players and everything. And now you come up to 2025, and it seems like there's sort of a repeat in history cycle. So I'll talk about that more later. I'll close with this. This is Dr. Eli David tweeting a picture of the Pope, a Bethlehem Christmas at the Vatican in Rome. The baby Jesus and a Palestinian keffiyeh. This is identical to the scene, by the way, on the picture behind the Pope when he went to Bethlehem back in, 2013, 2014, and gave a mass in Nativity Square, the baby Jesus and the Palestinian keffiyeh. And a lot of my Jewish friends and people I respect are saying, hey, somebody needs to tell the Pope, Jesus was not a Palestinian. He was a Jew in Judea, born in Judea. And this is the world that we live in. So look, a lot of these things happening very quickly, not even enough time to talk about all of them. I think all of these are significant in Bible prophecy, and we could go on and on and on, but we won't. So let's pray. There'll be links in the notes below, so you can go spend a lot of your time reading stuff. And I don't even have time to get through a smidgen of what I look at each week anymore. And everybody I talk to says this. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for today. Lord, we appreciate the prophetic word that you gave us that gives us a heads up about what to expect in troubling times. And Lord, keep us, don't give us a spirit of fear, give us a spirit of wisdom, knowledge, wisdom to understand, and also motivation to share the gospel with those around us. Pray that you'll help us to always keep that in mind in light of the times in which we live. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.